know why it's going on like that again and again. You play it again, I'll fix it. I don't know why it's happening. Something terribly wrong. I should change. Arshi. मानुष मानुषी के मित्रों को मेरा नमस्कार and welcome to this edition of मानुषी संवाद. आज माफी चाहती हूँ, कुछ टेक्निकल ग्लिचेस की वजह से बार बार कैमरा बंद हो रहा था, उसका लिंक टूट रहा था, तो 2-4 मिनट इधर उधर हो गए उसमें. और वैसे भी आज बहुत ही देश के लिए मातम का दिवस है. हमारे चीफ ऑफ डिफेंस स्टाफ विपिन रावत जी और उनकी पत्नी और उनके साथ कुछ और लोग एक हेलीकॉप्टर क्रैश में मारे गए. क्लियरली ये साबोटाज है, ये टेरर अटैक है, क्या है इसकी डिटेल्स धीरे धीरे समझ आएंगी. परंतु ये इतनी बड़ी खतरे की घंटी है देश के लिए. सच में जब मैंने ये खबर सुनी तो हाथ पांव में कंपकपी छिड़ गई, क्योंकि ये केवल चीफ ऑफ डिफेंस स्टाफ पे हमला नहीं है. जाहिर है कि ये मैसेज है मोदी सरकार को. ये मैसेज है कि यदि आपके चीफ ऑफ डिफेंस स्टाफ को हम हिट कर सकते हैं, तो आप सोच लीजिए आपके बाकी देश के जो पावर सेंटर्स हैं उनको कितना नुकसान पहुंचा सकते हैं. और आप में से सभी हमारे निशाने पे हैं, बिकॉज दिस इज वेरी अनयूजुअल जो आज हमारे देश में हुआ है. और मैं उम्मीद करती हूँ कि सरकार बहुत जल्दी ही खुलासा करेगी कि ये हुआ क्यों, कैसे हुआ, बिकॉज ही वाज इन वन ऑफ द सेफेस्ट हेलीकॉप्टर्स दैट देयर इज अवेलेबल टुडे. तो उनको श्रद्धांजलि देते हुए मैं आपको भी बताना चाहूंगी कि कल हम इसी सवाल पर चर्चा करेंगे, क्योंकि अगले कई दिनों तक मुझे नहीं लगता कि देश अपने को संभाल पाएगा इस बड़े हादसे से. और इसी पे चर्चा करना और इसके अलग अलग पहलुओं को समझना बहुत जरूरी है. इसी किस्म के सवालों से जुड़ी हुई है आज की हमारी चर्चा. इज द ग्लोबल जिहाद advancing or retreating? We don't know, for example, whether the attack on the helicopter that our CDS was traveling in had anything to do with a terrorist attack. What was the source of that attack? But we today have a very special guest, Mr. Robert Spencer, to discuss this issue. Robert, welcome to Manushi Samvad.
Thank you very much.
And before I ask you my first question, I'd like to introduce you briefly. Most of our viewers are likely to know you. In fact, many have been asking me to get you on and complaining why haven't Manushi invited you thus far. So many know you very well. They follow your work. But for those who don't know, I would like to briefly introduce you. Robert Spencer is America-based and pioneered in trying to promote understanding about the real face of Islam. It requires a great deal of courage and conviction to do what he has been doing for the last 40 years, and I salute him for that courage. He's a leading figure of the counter-jihad movement worldwide. In 2003, he founded and has since directed a website called Jihad Watch that tracks almost every incident of Islamic terrorism and crimes against non-Muslims across the globe. And I urge you all to follow this website. If you want to get a comprehensive picture of what's happening globally with regard to Islam's one way war against the whole world, against non Muslims, it's very important that you follow Robert Spencer's work and Jihad Watch. He co founded a group called Stop Islamization of America with Pamela Geller. 20 years ago, I would never have believed that anybody would need to give a slogan like Stop Islamization of America. America prided itself on being the land of freedom, democracy, and whatnot. But today, the threat of Islamization in America is as real as it is in India, in some ways more insidious. Spencer belongs to the Greek Orthodox Church. His grandparents were forced to emigrate from an area that is now part of Turkey because they were Christians. The Islamization process of Turkey led to ousting, genocide of Christians in that area. Turkey was, as many people already know, a very vibrant Christian. It hosted a very vibrant Christian civilization, and maybe Robert will briefly talk about that, how it has been so quickly Islamized. Since last 40 years, he studied Islam, its theology, its history, and consequences of Islamic supremacist ideology. His very famous best-selling books, very quickly, in 2021, Islamophobia and the Threat to Free Speech, The History of Jihad from Muhammad to ISIS in 2018. In 2012, Did Muhammad Exist? Was the title of Robert's book. Palestine Delusion, The Catastrophic History of the Middle East Peace Process came out in 2019. I'm not giving them in the right order. My apologies, Robert. And The Truth About Muhammad, founder of the world's most intolerant religion, was released in 2006. And there's another one, The Politically Incorrect Guide to Islam, which was published in 2005. Am I right? And it's in New York Times bestseller list. That's not the only book of Robert that's in the bestseller list. He is indeed a much sought after speaker and guide. Even intelligence agencies, I think, in the US take his help and services in equipping themselves to deal with the ongoing jihad. With these words, Robert, my first question to you: what made you take on such a high risk venture at a time very few were speaking about, leave alone against Islam?
Well, thank you. As you noted, my family is from what is known as the Islamic world, and the history of my own family is what actually got me into this, because I wanted to understand how it was that my grandparents had been exiled from Turkey, or as the Ottoman Empire at the time, and they couldn't tell me or wouldn't tell me. So I began to investigate on my own. And the more I investigated, the more I saw that this was really all about Islam, that Islamic theology mandates the subjugation of the non-Muslims under the hegemony of the Islamic law. And even in Turkey, when the Ottoman state was breaking down, the secular Turks continued this practice of subjugating and harassing and humiliating the non-Muslims, because in the first place they had deeply rooted Islamic attitudes and assumptions and beliefs, but also because the secular Turks were trying to create a secular Turkish state of which an Islamic identity was a key role, a key aspect. Consequently, they had no room for the religious minorities. And they also considered them to be infidels at war with Islam, because the Greeks and the Armenians and the Assyrians wanted their own states at the time of the dissolution of the Ottoman Empire. So this is why they were exiled, and this led me into what has become obviously a lifelong fascination with Islam, such that I began to consult with various individuals and groups in the 90s about the nature of Islamic theology and how it influenced Islamic terrorism, and what the aspects of the Quran and the life of Muhammad as depicted in Islamic tradition were that gave rise to this violence and hatred. After 9/11, of course, this became an issue that was of tremendous interest to many people around the world. And so I was asked to write a book about it, and thus embarked upon this all-consuming preoccupation. The threat, the problem that we face all around the world is that our governments and intelligence agencies worldwide are in complete denial and a state of willful ignorance about the jihad threat. And so I have continued to try to sound the alarm about it and speak clearly and truthfully about it, because the government agencies that ought to be doing that are not doing it. And that is to the detriment of all of us.
No, but you said that your grandparents weren't willing to talk to you about what had led to their ouster from their homeland.
That's right.
It's much later that you started examining the reasons and that history. It doesn't in a way surprise me. I also come from a family of partition refugees. My parents were ousted from what is now Pakistan. It's not that they completely uh, blanked out that memory. They would occasionally talk about it, um, but I don't think they understood it now. Does
Yeah.
it surprise you that Hindus, despite having faced more than 1,000 years of repeated genocides, and then recently in 1947, a very bloody partition, followed by ouster of Kashmiri Hindus and many areas, becoming mini Pakistan. They seem to be Hindus. Does it surprise you? Are the last to wake up? Are the last to start expressing their discomfort with the hegemony of Islam or its supremacist ideology?
I think this is actually a universal phenomenon. That the experience in your family that you describe is the same as it was in my family, and also among Greeks in general. As a matter of fact, for the most part, you will find that they are very aware of Turkish violence and oppression, but at the same time, they have no idea why the Turks behave in the way that they do. And as a matter of fact, many years ago, I read a book about written by a woman whose family had many of the same experiences that mine did, and that was that they were harassed and persecuted by the Turks and ultimately exiled. And this lady wrote a book about her discovery of all this, which corresponded very much to my own family's situation. And she spoke about even taking her grandmother back to the Pontus area in Turkey where her grandmother was born and grew up, and asking the people in the area, where were the Christians' houses? And they said there were never any Christians here. They had completely erased and obliterated the memory. But the point is that I actually contacted the writer of that book, and I explained what I was doing and explained that my work was dedicated to exposing the beliefs and the ideology that had given rise to this hatred and persecution. And the writer of the book wrote me back in an extraordinarily hostile manner and said it had nothing to do with Islam. Islam was a religion of peace and tolerance. It was just a matter of the Turks behaving badly. And I think this denial and willful ignorance is not limited only to the Greeks, but it is also, as you've noted, found among the Hindus and among every group of people that has faced widespread persecution by Muslims. And this is for several reasons. One is that the rules of the subjugation of the non-Muslim people under the hegemony of Islamic law involve not complaining about your situation or even taking any note of it, because if you do, it will get even worse. In other words, if the subject people were to say that they are being discriminated against, persecuted, harassed, then it gets even worse. And so over the centuries of persecution, over the centuries of the subjugation of the dhimmi people, the non-Muslim people under the rule of Islamic law, over the centuries, those subject peoples learned never to complain and always to say, oh, we love the Muslims and the Muslims love us and everything's great. And this was a survival mechanism so that they could not be persecuted further. And so now this has become a cultural habit among the people who are subjugated. They actually think that it's wrong somehow to take note of why this persecution is going on. And also at the same time, you have the large-scale public relations effort of the Muslims to say Islam is a religion of peace, and you're a bigoted, racist Islamophobe if you say otherwise. And this intimidates many people into thinking that they have to be silent about these issues.
Robert, it's not as if their daily, day-to-day behavior is any better. It's not as if they behave with great courtesy and generosity towards non-Muslims,
That's
so
for
that
sure.
you can be fooled. Because they look so, of course, there is an elite, a liberal so-called, an elite among Muslims who have liberal pretense, who will live very much like white Americans or Hindus in India. So there's that pretense of we're not really different, and Islam doesn't force us to live any differently. But whether it's a terror attack, 9/11, 26/11, or whatever, they stand by the very same people who claim to be liberal and who will say, oh, that's not real Islam. Real Islam is what people like us manifest. But the moment there's a terror attack, I've never seen the most liberal of them ever stand up and say, not acceptable. How does that work? How do they manage to fool everybody so easily? Is it just their ability to practice deceit, namely taqiyya, because it's training, it's systematic training? Or is it that we don't have it in us to understand or comprehend how evil this whole force is, how genocidal it is? We don't even want to believe it. And therefore, we pretend it doesn't exist, that genocidal aspect doesn't exist, that they, human beings are the same and all religions are the same, etc., etc., the way we comfort us. What is it? And America especially, how come such tolerance, not just tolerance, but supine surrender?
You're absolutely right. In the first place, yes, we're talking about masters of deception. The Islamic prophet Muhammad, of course, famously said, war is deceit. And the Quran in chapter 3, verse 28 allows for the deception of unbelievers under various circumstances. And I think that Americans in general have a reputation in the world of being naive. And I think this reputation is well deserved. That Americans generally tend to want to think the best of people, and that may be a laudable instinct, but it leads to a credulous acceptance of a very skillful effort at deception, an effort at deception that is more elaborate and more skillfully developed than anything Americans generally even possibly contemplate could even happen at all. They can't even imagine that people would be so elaborately deceptive. And so that's one reason why. Another is, of course, that the people who are being fooled want so very much to be fooled because the reality is so difficult to contemplate. That we're talking about a group that has been at war perpetually with everyone outside its own purview for 1,400 years. And the seeds of that war in the Islamic scriptures are still very much there and very much taken seriously by many Muslims. Many people find that too terrible to imagine. And so they would prefer to take refuge in complacency and think that when these deceivers come to them and they say Islam is a religion of peace, and these people are just a tiny minority of extremists who have twisted and hijacked the religion, they love to hear this because it makes the world seem a whole lot less terrifying. And so you have, on the one hand, skillful deceivers, and on the other hand, people very eager to be deceived. And this is a lethal combination.
Robert, I mean, you call the American people naive. Yes,
Yeah.
they're not only naive, but also ill-informed. However,
Yeah, very ill-informed, yes.
very ill-informed. I remember long years ago, this sentence is stuck with me. Remember the time Americans were taken hostage in Iran? I happened to be in America for some lectures at that time. And majority of people, American people I met, barring in the universities, would say, "Oh, how far is India from the hostages in Iran?" And to me,
Yeah.
it was a shocker because that's something even a school kid would or should know if you've done elementary geography. But more importantly, they're not at all so generous towards Hindus. As you can see, there is virulent Hindu phobia in America.
Yes.
Your mainstream newspapers, Washington Post, New York Times, CNN, name it, and you have it. And of course, American academia. One of the reasons I stopped, I started avoiding coming for lectures to American universities is that they only wanted me to do India bashing and Hindu bashing. If I was not indulging in Hindu bashing, if I defended my country and my faith, even on good, solid, sound ground, they'd get offended. American feminists would get offended. I mean, they think, you're too lowly a creature. There's something terribly wrong with you. But they don't make any such demands from Muslim feminists or those who call themselves feminists despite the burqa and the hijab, and who expect from American feminists full subservience to the ideology of subservience and misogyny that's represented in Islam. How does that work? Why are they so anti Hindu and so lovey dovey towards Islam? Is it petrodollars or is it something else?
Petrodollars are a tremendous aspect of the reason why. The universities in the United States have received tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars from people such as Prince Al-Walid bin Talal, the billionaire Saudi who has made sure that the universities in the United States do not speak the truth about Islamic jihad and Islamic terrorism. But on the other hand, they whitewash it and serve essentially as vehicles for the proselytizing of Islam. And this is the leading universities in the United States: Harvard, Georgetown, many others. They receive money from Al-Walid and they toe his line. Now, if that's the case, then obviously you're going to have a great hatred of Hindus going along with that because of the long-standing jihad against the Hindus in India. And so if you've got the money from the people who are in favor of that jihad against India going into American universities, you're going to turn American universities into places that are very hostile to Hindus. And it's the same thing with the American media. You noted the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN. I don't know their money sources. I wouldn't be surprised if they are, for the most part, the same as those of the universities, because the American establishment media is very much involved in whitewashing jihad. And I can tell you how it always works. Every time there is a jihad attack in the United States or around the world, or a prominent jihad plot that is foiled, the American media will report on it and then immediately publish stories that tell us that the perpetrator was not really Muslim. He never went to mosque, or the people in the local mosque don't know him, and he was thrown out of the mosque maybe. And then the next stories are all about how the people in the mosque, or the Muslims in the local area, are fearing a backlash from Islamophobes. And that becomes the story, so that essentially we hear all about how Muslims are the real victims whenever there's a jihad terror attack. And the worst example of this is 9/11. On September 11th, 2001, Islamic jihadis murdered nearly 3,000 people in the United States. Recently, of course, a couple months ago, we had the 20th anniversary of those attacks. And the Associated Press and the Washington Post and the New York Times and CNN and all the rest of them ran story after story after story about how Muslims suffered in the United States after 9/11. And most of it was false anyway. But not a single story about how the global jihad continues after 9/11. And so you have to think, well, these people, they must be bought as well. We know the universities are bought, and I strongly suspect that the establishment media is bought as well.
The universities till not too long ago, traditionally, were dominated by Christian denominations. They had a very strong presence. Every American university not only hosts a church or multiple churches, but more importantly, there's great deal of influence of the church or various denominations of it. Now, how has the church surrendered its territory so easily? Do they think they can have an alliance? I mean, I can understand in India, the church has a very cozy relationship with Islamists, because they've come to a conclusion: once we are through with these Hindus, we wipe them clean, we'll divide up this territory, we'll find ways to divide up. So they're talking about Dalitistan in the south, and Mughalistan, another one in the north, and various other pieces and parcels. So I can understand their common hatred of Hindus makes them unite in India. Though, if you are thinking long term, you would think that an alliance with Hindus is your best bet, because Hindus have never been aggressive. They've never committed any genocide. I can still understand the hatred of Hindus in India, because we come in the way of conversions. But in America, why would the church, why would Christian organizations yield with such ease?
Very good question. In the first place, the American universities, you're right. Some of the major universities were actually founded by various churches, but their influence long since vanished from those universities. And they're now under the influence of secularism. And this has been taken advantage of, manipulated very skillfully by Islamic propagandists crying racism and so on to encourage the left to consider that they were a victim class that they had to support. Meanwhile, the churches, as you have noted correctly, have joined into this effort. And Pope Francis, for example, has very strongly emphasized that we have to have dialogue with Muslims, whereas the people that he's talking with, having the dialogue with, such as the Grand Sheikh of Al-Azhar, Ahmed Al-Tayyib, have made it very clear that this dialogue cannot proceed and will not proceed if it involves any criticism of Islam, including noting Muslim persecution of Christians. And the Pope agreed. So the churches, the Catholic churches in America, have been completely neutralized by that and have bought into the notion that it's somehow hateful or Islamophobic to even stand up for persecuted Christians. Now, this sounds absurd, but I've had personal experience of this. In 2013, I believe it was, I was invited to speak at a conference of the Catholic Church in Massachusetts. And the Bishop of Worcester, Massachusetts, Robert McManus, canceled my appearance. And he explained that I was going to speak about the Muslim persecution of Christians and that that would harm the dialogue they were having with Muslims. Now, if Christians are being persecuted by Muslims, but talking about it will hurt our dialogue with Muslims. Then the persecution is going to continue because it's not being confronted. And so the dialogue, in other words, is completely useless, self-defeating. All it is an exercise in making all the people party to the dialogue feel good about themselves and make them feel virtuous and broad-minded. But the reality is that the dialogue would only make any difference if it actually had any power to stop that persecution. But it doesn't. It's a useless exercise. And so the Catholic Church is completely useless on this matter. And actually all the others in the United States and elsewhere have followed suit and are pursuing the same kind of dialogue, which is a useless exercise. And it's really especially appalling to see churches that have historically been viciously persecuted under the hegemony of Islam fall into line with this endeavor. But here again, it shows the power of propaganda.
Robert, in a way, it's very comforting for me to hear this, because while in India, most of us think, my God, there's something peculiarly weak-kneed about us. What's wrong with our DNA that we can't understand what they're about? Why are our leaders being fooled over and over again? But to know that the mighty US and its state machinery is also so weak-kneed, and its great universities that pride themselves on freedom of speech and pursuit of knowledge, are willing to accept all manners of tyrannical dictates from Islam. Mind you, not too long ago, US, its great mission was to battle communism because it's a totalitarian ideology. But I don't think the worst of communist regime is capable of doing what Islam does routinely, because they don't just slaughter in the way that, say, Stalin did. He massacred a lot of people, but not in the manner in which Islamists do. Brutality, sheer brutality of it. Sex slavery, enslaving people under the most humiliating conditions. Not just then, but even today, what they are doing to Yazidis in Syria. I mean, it's now openly known. So it's in a way very comforting, but at the same time very frightening. If the mighty US and the various regimes in Europe can buckle under their deceit, what chance do we have? In fact, I always had this fond hope that once America wakes up, or once European powers decide to battle Islam, then we can sit back and enjoy. They'll fix them. But it doesn't look like it, does it?
No, I think nothing is less likely to happen than that. The United States, especially during the Biden administration, has completely capitulated on this issue. You can take, for example, the fact that the Biden administration has brought over 124,000 Afghan refugees and has admitted that the vast majority of these people have not been vetted. And so you're talking about bringing over tens of thousands of people from a jihadi hotspot, where if they're not Taliban, then they're ISIS. And you're dropping them into American communities. This is a recipe for strife. And also, even if none of them wage jihad attacks, then you've still got the vast cultural dislocation and cultural conflict that is virtually inevitable, coming from people coming from a land where they understand that beating a woman is perfectly normal and acceptable, and child sexual abuse and so many other things, and that these things are justified in Islamic law. We've already had arrests of some of these Afghan refugees in the United States for child sexual abuse, for rape, and for spousal abuse. And none of the news stories, when they reported on these arrests, noted the very obvious fact that probably these men who committed these crimes did not know they were crimes, because they grew up in Afghanistan where they're not crimes. And you multiply that problem by 124,000. I'm not saying all 124,000 are going to be committing these kinds of crimes, but we would be naive in the extreme, and of course we are, to think that none of them will. There's going to be a whole lot of trouble from this. And this is because of the Biden administration, because they want to bring over people who don't speak English, people who can't work, so that they will create a dependent class that will help them advance their socialist agenda to make the government all-encompassing. And this is something that, you talk about the mighty United States. I'm afraid that's a thing of the past. This is only the beginning of the end, really, and of tremendous destruction within the United States and elsewhere because of policies that are being pursued by the United States government itself. It's a suicide. It's treason. We have a treason class running the country.
I fully agree with you, because the manner in which they dealt with Donald Trump, banned his presence on social media. I mean, this land of free speech, which allows all kinds of crap to be aired openly, including grossest forms of pornography, could not stand Donald Trump's Twitter handle, as though he was pressing the nuclear button every day with it. It's hard to believe. That doesn't shame or upset American people. Whether you like him or you don't, but what you've done is set such a horrific precedent. But
Yes.
coming to this Afghan refugee thing, we know very well that some countries, for example, none of the Islamic countries have taken. Saudi Arabia won't take them. Turkey won't take them. Um, Even Pakistan won't take them. They are saying go to India or go to Europe and America. Now, the point is that when these refugees assume this victimhood mantle, but I wonder why people don't ask if they are running from Afghanistan. Then Afghanistan is ruled by a very strict Islamic regime. Are they willing to say they're running from Islam? In which case, why don't they renounce it? Why not make that a precondition? You renounce Islam openly, publicly, and you get shelter. But instead, we know that in India or in America, when they come, they create many Afghanistans. They create many ISIS ghettos, Islamic ghettos. Nobody makes that condition. But Poland, for example, we heard this very clear statement by head of the states there. They won't allow even one Muslim to enter. Why is that the rest of Europe doesn't learn this?
It's racist and bigoted. This is the mythology. The idea that you must protect yourself from the possibility of jihad attacks and the possibility of the Sharia being imposed, that has been very ably stigmatized in the West, in Europe and in the United States and in Canada, as hatred. It's bigotry. And bigotry, hatred, and even racism, even though, of course, Islamic jihadis are of all races and Muslims are of all races. Nonetheless, I myself have been frequently charged with racism. And even just a few days ago, I saw somebody say, you just want to keep the brown people out of the United States. And I think this is a ridiculous calumny because, of course, I'm happy with anyone coming into the United States, unless you're coming into the United States in order to destroy it and bring it under the hegemony of a system of laws that is inherently oppressive. And everyone ought to be able to make these distinctions. But the Islamic advocacy groups in Europe and the United States have, with extraordinary skill, played upon the traumas of Europeans and Americans in regard to racism, to manipulate them into thinking that it's wrong to oppose jihad violence and Sharia oppression because it's racist. It's ridiculous on its face, but it has immense traction in the American public square as well as all over Europe.
But they have no shame in launching venomous attacks against wretched Hindus who've been wronged by all, who've never wronged anybody. I mean, European universities are as Hindu-phobic and as venomous their academics are, including those who steal Indian knowledge traditions, from Indian knowledge traditions, still won't have a good word to say about in Hindu faith traditions. But coming to the calumny against you, yesterday I chanced to, or I consciously decided to look at what Wikipedia has to say about you. And
Yeah,
sure,
Wikipedia is another one.
I mean, sure enough, here is an American enterprise, Wikipedia, am I right?
Yeah, I think
Uh,
so.
just as Twitter is, and has the most horrible things to say about you. It makes you into a hate monger, anti-Muslim, anti-Islamist. You're controversial because your writing provoke violence. You've been banned, and they made it sure to mention that you were banned entry in England because your presence would provoke communal or racial or interreligious riots or violence, whatever. Such negative descriptions of what are you doing? What's your big crime? All you're doing is holding a mirror to Islam. You're not even making commentary. You're saying this is what Islam preaches in the routine course of things. This is what their sacred books say. This is the life of Muhammad as documented by their own authorities. I mean, you started with that, right? Islam examining the doctrine. And it's not as if they deny it. They don't say, no, that's not it. We don't believe in XYZ. But you are cooking it up. No, they just don't want any discussion on it. And they don't think it's wrong to practice those hateful things. But it's Islamophobic for you to mention that these are Mazhabi sanctions. I mean, this logic is beyond me, and I'm sure it's beyond you. It keeps me stupefied, and I'm sure you can't make sense of it, but you've learned to live with it.
Well, sure. And you're right, Wikipedia is not a reliable source. It's deeply compromised. It may be useful for historical information in some circumstances or information about matters that are not controverted at the moment. But if you're coming to any contemporary individual or movement, then it is completely controlled by the left and is full of defamation of people who oppose the leftist agenda. And so you're right. They say anti-Muslim. I think it's not against any individual or any group to try to resist jihad violence. We're constantly told that Muslims themselves reject jihad violence. It's only a tiny minority of extremists who accept it. So if that's true, then why would it be anti-Muslim to oppose jihad violence? It's inconsistent and contradictory, but they don't care. What they're trying to do, of course, is discredit any resistance to jihad violence. Now, why would that be? I think that the international left loves Islam, and the international left loves Islam because Islam allows for the authoritarian, oppressive governments that they want to impose upon the world. Because Muhammad in a hadith is quoted as saying, obey your ruler even if he is an Ethiopian with a head like a raisin. Now, this is often quoted as being a sign of the racism of Muhammad or the racism of the early Muslims, and that's true. But the most important aspect of that hadith actually is that he says, obey your ruler in essentially any circumstances. And so Islam lends itself to authoritarianism. And there has always been authoritarian rule in majority Muslim areas throughout history, with the exception, sole exception of Turkey, when it secularized and actually rejected political Islam in the 1920s. And now, of course, it's going back the other way. So if you are a leftist who wants to impose authoritarian governments all around the world, you'll love Islam. But you won't love Hinduism, which does not lend itself to authoritarianism in the same way. And you won't love Christianity for the same reason. And so Wikipedia is just a propaganda organ for the left. And so it has to try to destroy me and people like me because we tell the truth about its favorite religion.
Robert, I mean, that it's working that way is true. and in India particularly, the left from its very inception has been pro-Islamic. It actively supported the partition movement. It favored Pakistan and and took the Stalinist thesis that India was not a one nation, it didn't qualify, that it should be broken down into 17. That was Stalinist thesis, which was adopted by the Communist Party of India, and they haven't given up on it, really speaking, though they had to function within the Indian Union. So they pretend it didn't happen, but at the first provocation, they moved that way. And for example, they're now supporting breakup of India. You would have heard that slogan, Bharat Tere Tukde Honge, Inshallah, Inshallah, which really made headlines, I mean, which shook us all up because it happened in Delhi in one of the elite universities. Now, but if you look at the ideology of left, yes, it's authoritarian. Yes, it's totalitarian, but the left propaganda about itself, which is what you and I grew up, you too were a leftist at some point in life,
Yeah.
I believe. So was I in some ways. But in my case, Gandhi or Aurobindo and other Hindu influences tempered it down, and I couldn't take their anti-Hindu tinge. But I was now because I understood left to mean you're pro-poor, you stand for equality of all, you stand for the rights of the disadvantaged, and you you work towards equality. That's the stated position. And it's very attractive to young people to believe in a world of equality. So, classless society, this, that. So, that's a myth of the worst kind. But in reality, no Islamic society anywhere in the world at any point in history has talked of equality, leave alone try to implement it. Islam is closest to the most virulent variety of fascism. I insist, even Hitler, in his slaughter of the Jews, didn't practice the kind of brutality the Islamists did in India, for example, which is not one bit to undermine that horrific chapter in world history. But what they do routinely, what they do to women, it's not just that you can have four wives and you can do halala, but sex slavery and the grossest forms of it. The point is, how do these leftists make sense of the world they're supporting, especially since no Islamic country provides any space to left? They're crushed and wiped out. And yet they think their communist haven will find fruition in Islamic republics of the world. I mean, what's their problem?
A lot of it is propaganda. A lot of it is wishful thinking. So, for example, in America, there's a very prominent leftist activist, Linda Sarsour, who wears a hijab and is a Sharia adherent Muslim. And she was speaking a year or two ago, and she said Prophet Muhammad was the first feminist. And Prophet Muhammad loved, I don't even remember what else it was, but it was a lot of ridiculous false statements. The problem is leftists don't know. The people who work with Linda Sarsour, they have no idea what Islam teaches. They've never read the Quran. They don't know anything about Muhammad. They don't know anything about Islamic tradition or history. So when Linda Sarsour says Prophet Muhammad was a feminist, they believe it. And so in the first place, they're fooled. They're eager to be fooled, like I said before. But also you have the idea, I think, on the left that they have contempt for religion. They don't understand religion. They are not religious people themselves. And so they think that they can control religious people, that religious people are stupid and easily led. And so if there's any conflict between Islam and the left, when the left has total hegemony, they think they'll be able to ride the tiger. They'll be able to control the Muslims in whatever conflict may arise. Now, we've already seen this not to be true. In Iran, when the Islamic Republic came to power, the Tudeh party, the Communist Party in Iran, supported Khomeini, supported the Islamic Revolution. And then when Khomeini came to power, what did he do? He put the Tudeh party in prison. I think the same thing is going to happen in the West. If the left takes over with their partners, the Muslims, there's going to be conflict ultimately, and I don't think the left is going to prevail. But we'll see. At the same time, it has to be emphasized what I said before. There's a very great compatibility between the two. And there's a reason why the left loves Islam. And so it may be that the leftists will convert. I wouldn't be surprised. We've seen it already in some leftist leaders in Europe. There was actually a politician in the Netherlands who worked with Geert Wilders, who of course is not on the left, but he was not with Wilders' program, obviously, Arnoud van Doorn, and he converted to Islam, and now he's working with the left in the Netherlands with no problem. And I think he may be a paradigm or a harbinger of what's to come.
You know, I can understand leftists or anybody else converting to Islam, especially men, not because the ideology is so sexy and so attractive, but because it provides you a ready-made community and network of support of the kind that no other faith group has available. You can commit the most heinous of crimes and your community will stand by you. They will hire the best of lawyers. They will make you into a hero. I mean, we've seen how the Burhan Wanis of India have been lionized. We've seen how, for example, the men who were responsible for terror attack on the Indian Parliament had the topmost Indian lawyers defending, waking up Supreme Court judges in the middle of the night saying they ought not to be punished, they deserve, all kinds of arguments in defense. We've also seen known Lashkar-e-Toiba operatives, self-professed operatives, being defended by the entire Islamic left liberal elite of India just because they wanted to get at Narendra Modi and his Home Minister in Gujarat, Amit Shah. They defended him as though he was a genuine victim, martyr to great causes. Now, that is understandable. If you convert, you get that kind of support. Who else will give it to you? If tomorrow you and I are attacked, there's a mob of Islamophobics come to attack us, to drag us out and tear us to bits, our neighbors are not going to stand up for us. They'll shut their windows. At best, they will call the police and say, please take care. And the police will be too terrified to enter such a territory, lest they be accused of racial excesses or whatever. That happens in India all the time. I know I can't count on the Indian police. I'm sure you can't really count. Can you? I'm not.
I can tell you, the local police here, maybe. I don't know. I don't bother them. They don't bother me. But I can tell you that in 2015, Pamela Geller and I put on a Muhammad cartoon contest in Texas because we wanted to stand for the freedom of speech and to show that we would not give in to violent intimidation on the part of the Muslims who had murdered the cartoonists of the Charlie Hebdo magazine in France. And so the FBI had an informant who was talking with the two Muslims who came from Arizona, 8-hour drive, to murder us all. And they were killed in the parking lot of our event by our security team when they drew their guns. But in any case, the FBI had this informant talking with the jihadis and did not tell us that the jihadis were plotting and planning to come to our event. They did not warn us and alert us, nor did they have anybody there who was going to fight against the jihadis. As a matter of fact, the informant was driving into the parking lot of the event behind the jihadis and egging them on, saying, tear up Texas. In other words, attack us, attack the event. And so the FBI was actually encouraging this attack on us and did nothing to prevent it. And so I'm here in the United States, and I know that the FBI is the enemy. The FBI wants me dead. I'm aware of this. There's nothing I can do about it. Maybe they'll do it someday. They failed the first time. But is the FBI trying to protect people who are standing for freedom? Absolutely not. The FBI is corrupt, compromised, and absolutely willfully ignorant about the jihad threat.
You know, this is chilling for all those, I'm sure, who think the American system is functioning so well and it has the most efficient security system, etc. What you describe sounds like the Indian police. But think of it. If you were to convert to Islam, or I were to convert to Islam, imagine our career trajectory.
Oh, we'd be heroes.
Yeah.
We'd be rich.
In wealth.
Famous.
We would be famous and nobody dared touch us. All we had to do is to cry Islamophobia or whatever, racial discrimination, and all doors would open. The red and the green and the golden carpets would be laid out for us.
That's
And
right.
you could get away with murder, you could get away with gang rapes, you could get away with slaughter, you could get away with anything. So there's big advantage to converting. And that brings me to my next question. For the first time, thanks to, I think, the platforms that social media has willy-nilly provided, much against the wishes of its founders, the Twitters and the YouTubers, I mean, the founders of all these platforms certainly didn't envisage that Robert Spencer would get this kind of a presence, given their current political inclinations. But it has given you and me a platform and many more. And therefore, we do hear more and more voices of people who are abandoning Islam, who are challenging Islam, ex-Muslims talking life without Allah being a far better life. This is what women are declaring, casting their hijab and you know, one of the most high-profile conversions took place just 2 days ago in India. You've covered it on your website, that of Dr. That's right. Now, at one level, it seems as if the tide is turning because people are now able to get information about Islam. People are able to read the Quran in the language they understand. They're able to read the life of the Prophet and his instructions and his mandates to his followers. And that certainly horrifies most sane people. So sometimes it seems as if the tide is turning. But on the other hand, one feels that for every one Muslim who opts out, 1,000 new recruits are being drawn into the Islamic fold. Is that a correct reading of the situation?
There's certainly both phenomena are happening. And you're right, the internet has changed things to a tremendous degree, such that Muslims in places such as Saudi Arabia, very closed society, can hear the truth about Islam. And I have had people write me from Saudi Arabia and say, I have to live outwardly as a Muslim or I'd get killed, but you have convinced me that all this is false. And I'm deeply honored by that kind of thing. At the same time, I understand the risks. Also, the opposite movement is very much happening. And I have a category at Jihad Watch, converts to Islam. And there is a tremendously high number of converts to Islam who get involved in jihad terrorism in the United States and around the world. And so you're absolutely right that this is a very great problem. And which one of them is more prevalent, which one of them is happening to the greater degree, people leaving Islam or people entering Islam and joining the jihad, I don't know. Time will tell. Certainly, Islam has never been challenged in 1400 years the way it's being challenged now. That is absolutely true. And that's going to have a tremendous effect. It already has upon the Islamic world. There are hundreds of thousands of people in the Islamic world who have left Islam. As a matter of fact, not even a majority of people in the Islamic Republic of Iran now identify as Muslims, but that's in an anonymous survey. Publicly, they're all Muslims, practically, except for a tiny minority of Baha'is and others, Christians and a few others. The converts to Islam, however, at the same time, there can't be denied that there are a great many of them as well. So there's no way to predict which way this is going to go at this point.
But what's your gut feeling? You know,
I always like to have hope. You know, it's terrible to live in despair, certainly, and we can have great hope in the possibility of a tremendous revolution in the world happening. As a matter of fact, when Trump was president, the Islamic Republic was on the ropes economically, the Islamic Republic of Iran. It was on the verge of collapse, and we still see people demonstrating in the Islamic Republic saying death to the dictator, death to Khamenei. That's extraordinary. And if the Islamic Republic were to fall, and I think we would see Islam being repudiated on a large scale the way it has never happened in human history in 1400 years of Islam. The Islam was driven out of Spain by 700-year resistance, but there was no large-scale repudiation of Islam. It was just that the Muslim occupiers were slowly driven out. There has never been a country that has actually discarded Islam freely, but Iran could be the one. It really could happen. I'm not saying it will, and I'm not saying that it wouldn't happen without a great deal of conflict and strife. But the dissatisfaction with Islam in Iran is palpable and obvious and is verified by various anonymous surveys. And so this could be explosive. If that were to happen, the reverberations in the Islamic world would be absolutely seismic. And so on the other hand, yes, the bad news is the United States is, as I noted, ruled by a treason class, and it can come at any time.
I will ask you about that. It sounds bizarre that United States should do that. Please explain it to our viewers, many of whom may not.
It's a complicated thing. It started in the 1960s, and of course the roots of it go back much farther. But in the 1960s, with the war in Vietnam, it became fashionable on the left to express open contempt and hatred for America. And the idea of a virtue of patriotism was thrown out the window. And this has only advanced in the decades after that, since then, that it's become even fashionable on the left to hate the United States. The Representative Ilhan Omar, who is a refugee in the United States, who was welcomed into the United States and protected in the United States, has likened the United States government to the Taliban. And she's applauded. She's a hero on the left for doing this. And so I don't see how any country can survive when a vast number of its people hate it and despise it. And we see the left carrying out a concerted campaign to accomplish this and to reinforce this hatred, tearing down the statues of not only the Confederate generals, but people like George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, General Grant, who was a Union general, and so many, Theodore Roosevelt, heroes of American history. And their statues are torn down by the left because they want Americans to despise American history and to be ashamed of being American. And it's had its effect already, and it's going to have its effect. If just this morning I saw that Joe Biden yesterday told Putin that there would be American troops in the Ukraine, in Ukraine if the Russians move against Ukraine. And I think this is insane on so many levels, but one of them is that if America gets involved in a major war with Russia, you're not going to find many Americans who are willing to fight for America, because the entire left, which is 50% or more of the country, hates the country. They're not going to fight to defend it. And this has been a very long-standing, concerted effort of the left, starting in the 60s, taking over the universities, taking over the media, taking over the educational system, and now it's bearing fruit. Very bitter fruit.
Well, it's interesting to know that apart from their pathological hatred for Hindus, they're also becoming self hating. Well, then there's hope for us. Because at some point, the day they cure themselves of self hatred, they might understand that those they hated without cause. But you know, coming to American feminists, you made reference to two of them uh, wearing hijab and all that. I, especially feminists who turn towards. There was a time I know in the 80s and early 90s, American feminists were very aggressive in supporting Islamic women who wanted to leave the tyranny of Islam. Several of them would do that, and suddenly it turned around. And I really now believe that those who are gravitating towards Islam, defending them to the point of lunacy, as there is, for example, Audrey Trushke. I mean, a lunatic woman. I really think that there is a personality disorder in the sense that they have internalized or fantasized very romantic notions of the Islamic harem, especially of these Saudi kings and these wealthy tycoons, the oil sheikhs. And I won't be surprised if women like Audrey Touche, the fantasy is to be part of such a harem. You know, so there'll be sex orgies and there'll be luxury, there'll be nothing to do but have fun and, be part of this make believe fairy world, fantasy world, which is what many people think these oil sheikhs have created for themselves. Because nothing explains feminists turning pro Islamic to, as I said, to the point of lunacy when they can see what Islam does to women in the physical form of burqa, hijab. I mean, their slogan has always been my body, my right, not my responsibility, my body, my right. Okay. But then what's happened? That body is not even to be seen except by the man who chooses to gang rape you or group of men or whoever owns you as a sex slave. I can't understand how they have flipped, or is it again money and career advancement opportunities that come rapidly? I mean, who would give Audrey Trushke even a primary school teacher job, if you were to have a proper interview and assess a person's ability to talk sense and teach kids something worthwhile? And here she is, a global celebrity making money. She's getting those big grants, which would never come her way if she weren't doing what she's doing. So it seems to me like for Indian media, the term very commonly used is prostitutes. Um, Academics are no less into selling their souls. And so, what would you call them? Intellectual prostitutes. And we'll have to invent a term, something that describes their inclinations and explains why they're doing what they're doing. It doesn't make sense uh, any which way. Now, what I would like to also ask you is Europe doing any better? Are some countries of Europe at least resisting? Is it advancing or retreating?
In Europe, it's a complex situation. France, Germany, Britain especially are in very bad situation, and the political class is completely corrupt and is aiding and abetting the bad situation. So Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, was elected pledging to stop the mass migration of Muslims into the country, and instead it's going on more than ever. Under his watch, with his help, he's completely betrayed his own people. It's the same thing with Merkel in Germany, Macron in France, and so on. Now, there is a groundswell in Europe. In the first place, Hungary under Viktor Orban and Poland, as you noted, are resisting, and some others. And there is a groundswell of resistance in Western Europe as well. There is the candidacy of Eric Zemmour in France, who is speaking out very clearly about how France is on the brink of losing its own identity as France, and that this has to be counteracted. And there are other candidates who are echoing the same things in France. And so there may be hope there. Germany is probably all too far gone, but I would never say it's over until it's over. There's pushback in more and more European countries. So while the situation is very dire in Western Europe, it's not completely hopeless.
You know, when it comes to England, I must say, given history of what England did to India and to Hindus in particular, and the manner in which they facilitated the creation of Pakistan, which is not a nation state. It's not as if they carved out a new nation. What they allowed is creating a launch pad for global jihad. People talk about it as a failed state. I said, no, but their aim is not to be a nation state. It's foolish to call Pakistan a failed state. They, that was not their agenda. Their agenda is to destroy Hindus, to carry out complete ethnic cleansing, to break every temple. That's their stated mandate. And every idol, and slaughter or convert every idol worshipper, which is Hindus. And they're doing it very well. They're bleeding India through 1,000 cuts. So I consider Pakistan far more successful, not as a nation state, but successful as a launch pad for global jihad, especially Mission Ghazwan. Whereas India is failing. Now, but when it comes to England, knowing that they facilitated it, not that they were the only cause, they facilitated it actively. I sometimes feel I'll be happy to see the day when ISIS flag flies atop Buckingham Palace. You know, I mean, I don't want to see the fall of America or Germany, but somehow I'm saying that's in my angry moments. Obviously, I don't wish it, but in
And
my angry moments, I said, it serves you right if it happens to you. You know, if it becomes another Pakistan, it could well, because they don't have the inner resilience to fight it out the way they are falling at their feet. And the one thing I would certainly like to bring back before ISIS takes over England are all the Indian treasures in the British Museum, the India Office Library, all the records, and much else. I mean, they have so much loot from India. But seriously, I mean, that's on a lighter note when I'm just giving vent to my anger and
I
anger.
understand entirely.
Hmm?
The British government has brought this upon itself.
Yeah.
And, you know, you noted earlier when we were talking about Wikipedia that I was banned from Britain. And this is often thrown up to me as evidence that I'm some terrible extremist or criminal. But the reality is that the British sent me a letter, the British Home Office sent me a letter that said, you said that Islam has doctrines of violence, and we are afraid you're going to repeat this in Britain.
And that's blasphemy, right?
Violence. I mean,
That's a lie, right?
yes, it's just it's the facts of the matter that Islam has doctrines of violence. So they were banning me from the country for telling truths they didn't want told. And it wasn't just me. Many others have been banned from Britain who resist jihad violence. Meanwhile, they let in jihad preachers with no problem. There's a long list that I have at Jihad Watch of the jihad preachers they have admitted while banning foes of jihad. So what are they going to get? They're going to get more jihad. And they have brought it upon themselves.
And what explains the resilience of Hungary and Poland?
I don't know what explains it, except that they have good governments who actually care for their people. In the Western Europe and in the United States, we have governments that are socialist internationalists who want to destroy the nation state and create a global socialist state. And so they hate their own people, and they're working against them. You have, for example, in America, in the Keystone Pipeline, that was an oil pipeline. And the gasoline prices in America were very low when Trump was president. Biden came into the presidency and he immediately closed the Keystone Pipeline. And the gas prices went up very, very quickly. And now it's about $2 or $3 more per gallon than it was when Trump was president. And this is only one way in which Biden is actively working against the American people in service of globalist interests. And it's the same thing in Western Europe. But in Hungary, you have the Prime Minister Orban saying he's going to work for the protection of the Hungarians.
Yeah.
And the Polish president is working for the protection of the Poles, which is what any ruler ought to do in any country. But they're not. That's not the interest in Western Europe or the United States. And so it's no wonder that our countries are in decline.
Well, China is taking a very strict line. And sometimes, again, in my depressed moments, not in my sane moments, I say, well, it wouldn't be a bad idea if India and China got together. I don't mind the Chinese regime making a pact, and becoming one unit because they alone can handle Islam. The Indian government seems rather almost the Indian state seems so heavily compromised and ready to placate. The more they hit the current or any other regime, the more even somebody who we thought was a strong man like Modi, the more he bends and bows. And so the contempt for Hindus is growing manifold. I've never seen Islam and Islamists more aggressive in India as today. And at the same time, they're accusing Hindus of turning fascist. Just as they wouldn't let you into England saying, you're going to promote hate by saying Islam promotes violence, and it's the biggest lie on earth, right? Similarly, if we quote from their own Sharia, they get outraged. This is hatred, and now, but won't deny it. And here we have the supra-nationalist parties and the RSS saying Hindu Rashtra is incomplete without Islam, that they have the same DNA. Now tell me, I have this theory, and this is going to be my final question to you before we take questions from the audience or comments from them. There's big brouhaha in India among peaceniks. And I was also once upon a time very Gandhian in my approach to these issues, till I saw better. Now, they say that Hindus, Muslims, same DNA. Therefore, we are brothers, Hindu, Muslim, bhai bhai. And therefore, you cannot treat either Islam or Muslims as being others. They're one of us. And therefore, this civilization is as much theirs, not recognizing that they came here to wreck it. Their stated agenda was that. Now, I believe that this DNA theory is all bunkum, because if you go by that logic, Robert, then all the hundreds of thousands of Hindu women that were captured as sex slaves from India means that even in the Arab world, same DNA, right? At least from the female line. They captured so many slaves and converted them and sold them in these slave markets of the Middle East. So same DNA. But I believe that it's not just the physical DNA, the emotional DNA, the intellectual DNA becomes different instantly almost overnight. If you don't, you can't be a Muslim. And you are taught to despise ethical considerations, humane values. So your DNA can't stay the same because you imbibe values that put you beyond the pale of humanity in some ways. I mean, what do you think of this DNA theory nonsense?
I think it's a cynical argument to obscure the fact that the Muslims, as you noted, came into India as aggressors and conquerors. and they laid waste to the Hindu civilization. And that the fact that this began many, many centuries ago is manipulated by people in order to argue that, well, it's so long ago that now they are one of us, and so on, as you've noted. Well, I can tell you, for example, take Adam Gadon. Adam Gadon was an American convert to Islam who was an Al Qaeda operative. And so he and I are both Americans, probably from very similar backgrounds. And Adam Gadon is somebody who, if I had ever encountered him, he once made a video where he was inviting me to accept Islam. Now, in Islamic theology, if you invite someone to accept Islam and they refuse, then you can go to war with them or kill them. So if Adam Gadon had ever encountered me personally, I wouldn't be here to talk to you now. And yet, you could say, well, we have the same background, we're both Americans, and so on. It's a ridiculous argument. We have to work on the level of belief, and Islamic belief is inherently supremacist, aggressive, violent, and expansionist, and makes victims of all those who oppose it. And consequently, the fact that there may be, it's certainly true that there are many Indian Muslims and Pakistanis who share the same DNA as Indians, because of course you go back far enough before the conquests, and they're all Hindus. But this doesn't take away the aggressive, expansionist, supremacist nature of their ideology at all.
And the DNA, I'm convinced the DNA changes. It cannot remain the same. I somehow instinctively feel, for example, their fascination for raped wombs. Now, I cannot believe that a child conceived to a mother who's shrieking because she's being gang raped, or abducted, or treated as a sex slave, that the child's DNA can be a peaceful DNA. There has to be personality disorders inherent in it, especially if it continues generation after generation. Because
I don't know anything about DNA really, but I can tell you that.
But among Hindus, Robert, there is a whole lot of literature, rituals to encourage families to make sure that the woman in her pregnancy is treated with special consideration and respect. And there are so many rituals associated with making her feel good. Also, the manner and the time of conception, what periods you avoid. There all those things so that the conception takes place under very auspicious, happy, healthy circumstances. And when a woman is pregnant, then she's supposed to have a picture of baby Krishna in front of her bed. So she wakes up to the loving presence of baby Krishna. And so the dream of every mother is to have a Krishna-like baby, and all that. There's so many auspicious rituals associated with not just pregnancy, then how do you suckle the child, etc., etc. Now, imagine all these women, whether it's Yazdi women or Hindu women who are being abducted, gang raped. I mean, this womb jihad that's going on, this womb hunting, which just doesn't stop. How can children born of that, of those kind of unions, be psychologically healthy? I can't believe that that DNA remains the same, even though you took the woman from Yazdi community or from a Hindu family, and then you mold her beyond recognition, and then you repeat it generation after generation. Anyway, that's my thought of the day, not of the day, but I've been thinking about it a lot, because it's hard to make sense of this world. How you can uphold such brutality and get away with it, and then play victim and guilt trap everybody else and call Robert Spencer a hate monger and call for his head because he's a hate monger, and you're a victim even while saying, go slaughter him and I'll give you an award. I mean, you're a victim, right? Even if you call for beheading somebody, as they're doing with Basim Rizvi, who's just converted back to his ancestral faith. Would you like to say something in conclusion before we take some comments?
Yeah, very briefly, just I know little or nothing about DNA, but you're absolutely right in the sense that you have Muslims being raised from their earliest childhood in hatred and contempt of non-Muslims and in all the other assumptions that are embedded within Islamic teachings. And this is going to have an effect. And it has a tremendous effect in Islamic societies. I can tell you, for example, that my friend Bosch Fawston is a cartoonist. He was the winner of the Muhammad Art Exhibit and Cartoon Contest that I spoke about earlier. And he was a Muslim. He was raised in a Muslim family that was not religious. They were secular in the United States. And yet he has said that even though they never read the Quran, they never went to mosque, they were only nominally Muslim, they learned to have contempt for women, to hate Jews, and all these other attitudes that are embedded within Islamic teaching. And it's just something that is in the air in Islamic culture.
Sure. Let me start by reading one of the comments that has just caught my eye. This is Master Stroke Wadi. He says, Robert Spencer is a hero for most of us. He has risked everything to fight barbaric Islam. What do you have to say to that?
Well, that's very generous. Thank you. I'm honored by the statement. I'm just one guy trying to tell the truth about these things. We all have to be fighting now. You know, it used to be, I think, in all our countries, we would think that if we were in crisis, in a national crisis, that the military and the government would take care of things, and we can't count on that anymore. We have to do our work try to defend our freedoms ourselves.
Good. Admin ji, will you bring other comments? You had brought one just now. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you read? And you want to answer, please?
Certainly. Why are U.S. press and universities anti-Hindu? The old propaganda that Christianity and Islam are Abrahamic religions, whereas Hindus are pagans, still works well. Also, victims of Islam suffer from Stockholm syndrome. Other example is Iran. Whole civilization still suffers from the syndrome. Well, that's true to a tremendous degree. Taking the last part of this first, you take Muslim women, for example, often wearing the niqab and completely covered. Some of them are the most strenuous proponents of Sharia, even though Sharia is oppressive to women, because they have been indoctrinated into the idea that this is the natural order of things that the supreme master of the universe wants. And so, yes, I think that is Stockholm syndrome on a culture-wide level. I don't know that it's. I don't think it's propaganda that Hindus are pagans and Christianity and Islam are Abrahamic religions. That's not so much the issue in American press and universities. It's, as I discussed before, it's the fear of racism and bigotry that people have. The Islamic groups have very skillfully made opposition to jihad terror a matter of racism. And so the American universities and the media, very afraid of racism, they line up with the jihadis.
Well, this is a very good question to you from Jaima Bharti. Kindly ask about the no-go zones in Europe and America. We have plenty in India. What about Europe and America?
There are very few in America, but they're growing, and there are many in Europe. The assumption is that the Muslims are the best of people on earth. That's the Quran, chapter 3, verse 110. And the unbelievers are the most vile of created beings. That's the Quran, chapter 98, verse 6. So if you are a member of the best of people, if you are one of the best of people, and you're coming to the land of the most vile of created beings, you're going to have contempt for their laws and their customs and their culture. And so the imams in Europe preach that assimilation is cultural rape and must not be done, that the Muslims must hold themselves aloof from European culture. And consequently, they establish these enclaves where Sharia is enforced. And as the Muslim populations grow, the enclaves grow, and they become no-go zones where the non-Muslims are considered second class. And it's not that they can't enter, but if they enter, they have to respect the Islamic mores, even when they conflict with the laws of the land.
I want to, sorry, have you finished?
Yes, I was
You
just actually going to read the next one, but
No,
go
I
ahead.
want to add something to that earlier question because you said something very important. They create no-go areas saying we are the best people and these are wild creatures, so they should. How do they, in their own heads, justify coming to the lands of these wild people? Nobody invited them. And is it, Robert, another well-planned conspiracy that you create circumstances as in Syria or Afghanistan, you create a humanitarian crisis, drive out these people, and they're not just fleeing, but they are made to go create Islamic enclaves in first world countries. Could it be a very well thought out plan of action to conquer Europe and America?
I think it's possible. I don't know if the refugee crises were artificially constructed. Obviously, the Taliban were taking over Afghanistan, and so there were refugees. The criminal aspect of the Biden administration, one of the many, is that they didn't bring over our friends and allies. They brought over people we have no idea who they are. That's a terrible situation. But the way that they justify it themselves, coming to the lands of the vile beings, is also in the Quran, chapter 4, verse 100. A great reward is promised from Allah to those who emigrate in the cause of Allah. So if you move from one country to another in order to bring Islam to the new country, you get rewards from Allah, which is a great inducement. And so they're coming here in order to expand, to establish these no-go zones and expand them until ultimately the whole country is a Sharia state.
So then, could it not be deliberate, artificially created crisis?
It could
Because
be. I
today,
don't have any
for
evidence of that.
example, it said that if India were to open its gates, half of Pakistan would flow into India. They don't want to live there. They're happier here, just as Muslims are happier living in America or England. So maybe it's part of a whole deliberate strategy.
It may be. Certainly, it's a well-financed effort. We
Oh,
see these refugees, so-called, coming to the United States, and it's very clear that someone has paid for their passage, someone has arranged for it all to happen. We have people coming from Haiti, and you can't get to America from Haiti without a boat, and so someone paid for the boat, someone paid for it all. These caravans coming up from South America, and they're well fed and housed all along the way. Someone's arranging for this, but I don't know the details. I don't think anybody knows the details.
somebody
Obviously,
needs
the
to
establishment
research on
media.
this.
I'm sorry.
I said this needs to be researched
Yeah, the
because
establishment media though is in the tank. They're on the side of these efforts, and so they're not going to tell us what's going on.
no, but some of the think tanks you're part of, Robert, could take on this.
I am afraid that I'm not affiliated with anyone who has the resources to undertake something of this magnitude.
Ah,
It would be an
that reminds
investigation
me.
of this would be a very huge investigation that would take probably millions, if not billions, of dollars to do properly. And the problem is, of course, also that so many people are compromised in regard to it that it would be very hard to find the truth. This is a massive coalition of the left and Islamic groups, and they have an incredible amount of money and power.
And that reminds me of this hilarious bit of information on your Wikipedia profile, whereby they mention you were given $136,000 US dollars in 2010, whatever. You know, no astronomical figure, but they don't say for 1 year, for 10 years, I mean,
Exactly.
you know what I mean? And why would they mention it? Because they're probably paying much more to control Wikipedia pages to give
Yes.
people like you and me negative profiles than you and I will ever earn in our entire lifetime or 10 lifetimes.
Yes.
So it's hilarious for me the way they put in to make it appear as if you're doing a paid job. It was so cheap. It was so cheap to do it and do it so. It was also very very clumsy. It wasn't done intelligently, but they think it's enough. You throw mud, and some of it is bound to stick. Anyway, the silent
Yeah.
bong
Well, actually,
has.
could I actually comment on that? The charge, as you noted, is ludicrous, but it's interesting to note that there have been various reports about so-called Islamophobia in the United States, and they all try to make out that we're all getting rich doing this, and that it's this well-funded effort, this insidious effort of hate. Uh, but the way that the reports are constructed is they put all these different groups together that have nothing to do with each other, including mine, and then take the total amount of money that we received in donations, not just in 1 year, but over a period of 10 years or 15 years, and add it all together so that it looks like a large sum, without noting that, well, you have to divide that up by 15 years and by 15 organizations, and then it's very clear that all of us are actually quite poor, and we're operating on a shoestring, operating with very small budgets to try to get these words out. And the irony is that these groups that do these reports have $50 million budgets, $100 million budgets, handsome budgets from leftist groups. And so they're the ones that are the organized industry of hate propaganda. But
Well funded, rolling in wealth hate propaganda machines.
yes,
And I could tell from your website that you're not rolling in wealth. It's so simple, it's so plain. You can tell from the glamour that's visible on their websites, by the way. So, anyway, Silent Bong has a question for you.
yes.
You want to read it?
What are your views about the group ex-Muslims of North America? Are they any good, or are they the same as ICNA, the Islamic Circle of North America, and CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations? I'm not too familiar with ex-Muslims of North America. I can say that there's a strange phenomenon that I've encountered recently among many ex-Muslims. And that is that they defend Islam and they're more angry with people who are not Muslims who criticize Islam and jihad than they are with Muslims who commit Islam and jihad. So they're ex-Muslims, but I wonder if they're really ex-Muslims or if they are Muslims being deceptive, or if they are just ex-Muslims who have not actually shed all of their old Muslim attitudes. I don't know which it is, but it's one of those two. And I don't know about ex-Muslims of North America in particular at all.
But your intelligence agencies would have the information, just that they're not willing to act on them, right?
American intelligence agencies, you're talking about the FBI that I described before, completely corrupt, completely sold out, compromised. And they tried to bring down Trump with a hoax about him being compromised by the Russians. And it was all fake. And the FBI was deeply involved in it. And then, of course, as I noted, they tried to kill us who were doing the Muhammad cartoon contest, or else I should say, they sat by and let it happen that the jihadis attacked our event. The jihadis were killed by our own security, not by the feds. The feds are not at all on this issue, not at all.
But at least in America, your own security is allowed to kill in self-defense. In India, even the army is not allowed. Army men have cases, fake cases on them for atrocities in Kashmir, and all kinds of fake cases are. They're not supposed to fire when jihadis throw stones at them, when jihadis hurl bombs at army bunkers or whatever. They're not even supposed to fight back in self-defense, except under somebody like the army general CDS. One of the reasons he may have met this tragic end is that he was in favor of an all-out war against terror. His hands were tied by the political establishment. They tried to curb his willingness to go all out, but still, I mean, we witnessed a little more determined action under him than under many other previous regimes. Here's Shiv Arya. You want to read the question?
Yes.
And
How did you justify Buddhism, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Afghanistan, Punjab, Sindh, Bengal, Malaysia, Indonesia were Buddhist majority? And anyway, well,
Oh, you removed it. Hello, hello.
yes.
Please bring back the previous question, admin. Robert was reading it. Don't
Anyway,
remove.
that's the same jihad that has taken place everywhere else. This is not really. There's no different story there. The jihad has been worldwide. The history of jihad is something that most people have no idea about, and that's why I wrote the book, The History of Jihad. People don't know that it's been essentially a war against the entire non-Muslim world from the beginning. So, Mr. Spencer, what's the solution out of this vicious circle of nefarious nexuses? Where do we start? What do we do, practically speaking? Well, we have to get rid of our rulers and get better ones. And so we have to elect people who are realistic about this threat and courageous enough to deal with it. This is always a very great difficulty because it happens again and again and again in America that there are people who are elected who say all the right things when they're running, and then they move to the left when they're elected. But we have to keep fighting in any way that we can. And of course, in our own situations, the propaganda offensive is where we need to be fighting. And in our own circles, trying to counteract the lies that the Islamic advocacy groups and the left tell, and tell the truth about the reality of jihad.
Well, you talk about electing the right people. You elected one of the worst presidents America ever had.
Yes, I did.
Throwing
Yes.
a man after overthrowing a man who may have had 10 other infirmities of character, but at least on this issue, he was more clear.
Yes.
And was ready to battle it out. Um, really, it's so depressing. But my gut feeling is that the tide is turning.
Yes.
So the truth
No doubt.
has its own power.
The more
And
they advance, the more they wake people up. And the more they wake people up, the more the resistance forms.
that's right. And Pia, you've been, I know, following our programs very regularly. For India, we know Ghar Wapsi. Each one of us should vow to bring back those who deserted or left under brutal oppression, enable them to come back, just as Dr. Rizvi came back and went back into his ancestral faith. Each one of us must make the effort to do so. There are plenty of Muslims, men and women, who want to escape. We just have to make it easy for them. I'm, at least for India, I'm convinced that's the case. Just make it easy for them. But Robert, suddenly a new question comes to me. I mentioned this somewhere midway, that the advantages of converting, whether you're an American or a Hindu, Christian or a Buddhist, is that you get enormous support from the networks. It's a very close knit corporation where you get unconditional help as long as you obey some of their mandates. Now, does it not require Americans to rethink their determined efforts to destroy and break down the family system and the community bonding? Each one, me, mine, and that's it. Um, there is no functioning family system in India, I mean, in America. That extended family, there's like in India, we still have plenty of communities where a person can claim to have several hundred close relatives and they get together for regular functions. They're there for all kinds of support systems. um, America doesn't have that. Very often, even your children aren't there for you, or your siblings aren't really there for you if you're in trouble. Now, don't you think this is something that is driving a lot of youngsters to seek the solace of community support?
Without any doubt. There's no doubt it's a terrible problem in America today that people are so atomized and individualism is so dominant that there is no that so many people, their lives are destroyed because they don't have any community, they don't have any support, and they're alienated and isolated. And also it drives people into joining these groups that sometimes are quite harmful. And so Islam is able to take tremendous advantage of that, because you convert to Islam, as you've noted, and immediately you have a family and you have people who will look out for you. And so that's very appealing, and that's one of the reasons why Islam is advancing in the West.
While America spreads and their American feminists spread their ideology of fragmenting societies, families oppressive, male and female can't really coexist. I mean, all that patriarchy and its so-called oppression, and now they're opting for Islam's freedom, the freedom of haven promised by freeing themselves from the clutches of patriarchy, white male patriarchy, and ending up in the harems of Islamists. Very nice. Well, somebody else wants to tell you that you are a real guru. And with Jihad Watched, obviously, this is a group called Free Hindu Temples.
Thank you.
When you have many, Ashutosh says, I'm following Mr. Spencer, Dr. Bill Warner, etc. Since 5 years, I have learned a lot from them. My regards to them, and so on and so forth. There are plenty of compliments for you, and it pleases me enormously to see that you have quite a fan following in
Thank you
India
very much.
as well.
I'm honored.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll wind up now. It's been nearly, it's going to be 2 hours in another 10 minutes. So I think we've had a longish discussion. I'm very happy that you gave us time. And I'm sure there'll be many more occasions to gain from your insights and your encyclopedic knowledge about Islam.
Thank you. I
Thank
look forward to speaking with you again. Thank you.
Thank you. And friends, those of you who are still watching, plenty of you are. Please do like, share, subscribe. I always forget to tell you that. I remember it at the end when my admin reminds me. Please bol do ma'am, please bol do, share karo, subscribe karo, support karo, please karo. Manushi does need that kind of support. And tomorrow, we hope to take stock of what's happened today, the great tragedy that has struck India today. We hope to be able to take stock of it. Um, it's a night that many of us will be very restless, because these are very serious warning signals for national security as well as for our civilizational security or civilizational survival. So, time not to get depressed, but do our little bit. Take inspiration from Robert Spencer, who for so many long years must have battled alone or with marginal support. And it's only with the coming of the internet that Robert is now, um, a global presence and a real presence in the lives of so many of us. So इनसे सीखिए, और हर एक को ऐसा ही इंटेलेक्चुअल क्षत्रिय बनना है. केवल इंटेलेक्चुअल क्षत्रिय नहीं, बाहुबली क्षत्रिय भी. अभी समय आ गया है जब हम अपनी रक्षा खुद करने का बीड़ा उठाएं और उसकी क्षमता बनाएं. इन्हीं शब्दों के साथ आप सबको नमस्कार, शुभरात्रि, जय हिंद. Thank you, Robert, once again.
Thank you.
Hmm.